Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/UFCW Canada.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, here at the CHEK News World Headquarters for another week in BC politics. We have the latest on the American tariffs. We have a BC budget, which instantly got swamped by tariffs, and we have some more controversy in the BC Conservative caucus. So we are going to get to that by bringing in the pod squad. You know them each and every week. Jeff Ferrier, Jillian Oliver, and Allie Blades are here to walk us through all the stuff that is happening in BC politics. It's fascinating because it changes so quickly every single day. This week, tariffs. They came, they went, they're back, sort of half here. The government was kind of rolling with that. Premier David Eby announcing he's bringing in legislation next week that will let him tax trucks that are going to supply the United States through British Columbia to Alaska, lower interprovincial trade, borders, and some other, as of yet, unspecified things, it sounds like. And plus all the bourbon, whiskey, and other red state alcohol, poof, off of the store shelves. So let's start with that. The Premier standing in front of a gigantic Canadian flag that just happened to be hung on the legislature to express his patriotic response, using the words pissed off when it comes to Donald Trump. Jillian, colorful language, good news cycle. I don't know, what do you make of the response and the position the government keeps ending up being in here, having to roll with the punches with the Americans?
Yeah, certainly it seemed like Eby was trying to channel that sort of anger that people are feeling. I think it was definitely a deliberate choice to use that strong language. He used it again in an interview this morning on a U.S. Cable news channel. And I saw, it made national news, which I'm not even sure if the budget did. So I think, it's obviously that this is why we keep talking about tariffs every week. It's what's on everyone's mind. He is, trying to show that leadership. But I think, the announcement itself really exemplifies the chaos of the situation. It was just moments before they were set to announce these retaliatory measures with the tolling trucks headed to Alaska that we got the news that the tariffs were paused, and then it turned out to actually be maybe fully suspended. It's just constant chaos, and it's kind of funny to see, it's so hard for politicians to sort of make plans given the fluidity of the environment. But I think, I agree with what he said that, despite the constant moving targets, we need to have a plan and kind of stick to it. What this legislation is sort of enabling legislation. So they're not tolling the trucks right away. They're just giving themselves the option to kind of turn that on. And I think, people want to see the retaliation. It's not as strong a measure as the cards that provinces like Quebec and Ontario have to play with fully shutting off power to the states, but it's something that we can do that will get their attention and have an impact. I think more important is the second part of the legislation, removing interprovincial trade barriers, the other things that the province is talking about to diversify our trading partners and stimulate the BC economy, because really, given the chaotic environment, what we really need is a means to create more stability for ourselves that's not dependent on the U.S.
Yeah, we will see if the interprovincial trade barriers actually fall. Like, we've been talking about it for years. Every province still kind of would prefer to elevate its own chicken and dairy and liquor on store shelves beyond the other provinces. So I'm not entirely sure that it will happen, but Jeff, giant flag and unparliamentary language elevates the Premier all the way up to the top of the news cycle. He's certainly tapping into something that he's been riding now for a few weeks.
Yeah, it should have been a bigger Canadian flag. Right. Let's be clear. It should have covered the whole front of the legislature building.
You got to just like push the flag aside to get into the legislature?
Yeah, you'd have to have a special flap door that no one could see and suggest that it's doing anything bad to the Canadian flag. That's how big I want that flag on the legislature. Right. I think Eby, in his comments and in the actions he's taking, is channeling the anger of British Columbians at the unjustified tariffs that the Americans have placed on us, that Donald Trump has placed on us. I'll note from a political side that it has been remarkable to see the political climate in British Columbia and indeed across Canada change on a dime. Heading up to these troubled days in recent weeks, we've been very focused on internal matters. We talk about housing, we talk about affordability, we talk about public safety. Now it is all about the tariff. It's all about Canada's relationship with the United States. It's about the threat to families and the economy. It's about a threat to our sovereignty. And we're at a stage now where if someone doesn't stand in front of a Canadian flag and say that they're pissed off, they may as well go into the forest and hang out with Sasquatch, because no one wants to hear anything but unity and strength and resolve after the betrayal that we faced from the Americans. So that's why you see David Eby doing that. That's why you see Doug Ford in Ontario. I've never thought I would say the day when Doug Ford is doing a great job, but holy hell, he's doing a great job. And even Justin Trudeau is standing strong. Maybe he wants to revisit his decision to leave the Liberal leadership. There's a convention this weekend. Maybe he could run again and get a new mandate.
Right. How long, like, Allie, I don't disagree with what Jeff's saying there. Like, it seems like that's what people want right now. How long does
show's over. Show's over.
How long does that last, though? Because the real world interaction on all the issues that Jeff just mentioned, somebody gets sick, you got to go to a hospital, you're waiting 12 hours if it's even open. Like, there are still daily struggles in life that were important in the election, which have been sort of washed away for a little bit. But how long does this last, do you think?
It lasts as long as the NDP want to use it as an excuse for the various reasons as to why they can't deliver on those things. And, we're going to dive into the budget conversation as well, but that's how long it lasts. As long as it's politically useful to the NDP, that's as long as they're going to blame everyone else except for themselves.
Or we run out of flags.
Very simple answer. And everything about Canadian flags, which Jeff is right. It's channeling the anger of a lot of people. But it also means that anger is going to look at someone beyond Trump very soon. And when people realize that we're not in a resilient position because last year's budget, we went into a giant deficit. On that note, I think budgets generally are cursed. The federal budget was the day that Chrystia Freeland didn't deliver it, and it kind of blew up the Liberal Party. And now that's the result of this Liberal leadership race. And now the tariffs happened onto the provincial budget day. And so budget days are not good days recently. But that's what it's all pointing to now is, we're talking about these interprovincial trade barriers because that's something that we could potentially do. I'd like to see David Eby talk about that more.
The budget, which I guess we'll get into now, something normally we would spend probably a whole show talking about, just completely washed away by this. Printed a little bit earlier than the Trump announcement, so early they couldn't even wrap it in a Canadian flag. That's how early the budget was printed. But the figures were staggeringly bad economically, and yet it didn't really go anywhere. It's kind of didn't get even into the news cycle in that sense. An $11 billion deficit, the new top score for record deficits in provincial history. There is no Trump aid programs in there, but there is a contingency, $4 billion to draw upon later in the year, and then a bunch of debt. Mainly, I think, Jeff, we'll go back to you on this, but mainly hold steady, right? It's like a hold steady budget, and yet the biggest deficit in the history of the province, and it doesn't really actually fund anything new. That's a tough circle to square.
Yeah, it is very much a hold tight budget. We saw incremental increases in the Ministry of Health and some tax relief for film and TV production to keep those jobs here. But pretty much every other ministry, every other program, it was largely a flatlined budget to reflect the times that we are in, the threat that we're facing from tariffs, the economic uncertainty that we're facing. It was a prudent budget in that respect. The government, though, is facing a situation now where the big adversary that they face is not just the Americans, it is also arithmetic. I think they would have liked to have been more interventionist in terms of their response to what's happening. But when you have a deficit of $10.9 billion and you're looking at long-term debt servicing costs, when you're looking at credit ratings, when you're looking at the need to move from structural deficit into a more sustainable one, you don't have a lot of room to maneuver. You said it was an $11 billion deficit, though. It was a $10.9 billion deficit.
I used the power of math and arithmetic to round it up.
That $100 million is important, though, because $11 billion, that $11 billion is what the Conservatives in the election campaign promised that their deficit would be. So when I hear John Rustad talking about how this is disastrous, one might hope for a little intellectual consistency, but that would be like expecting a fish to appreciate a bicycle.
Right. Okay. Fish to appreciate a bicycle. I was waiting for a 70s TV reference, but I didn't.
Have you never seen The Little Mermaid, Jeff? That's all they dream about.
That's cartoon. I mean, we're talking about fish appreciating bicycles in real life.
Right. Okay. But Jillian, it's hard to top that one. But what do you think of the budget and the way? Like maybe we don't care. Maybe we've talked in the past shows like. Does the deficit, does the debt matter? Certainly it's an emergency situation, the government says, although it's not really spending money in this budget on the emergency, but that maybe they need to run a giant deficit for emergency. I don't know. What do you think the public sentiment is on it?
I think that people are it's cause for concern, but people also understand that given cost of living, homelessness, all these other crises, that making cuts could make things materially worse, and putting ourselves into a bigger crisis is only going to make them even more expensive to get out of. It was I think the thing that was most interesting for me, because like we said, the budget is pretty status quo, was listening to the finance minister talk after. She said that they're taking a pause and they're going to examine where they can find, efficiencies and where they can save money without sacrificing frontline services. That's not really something that we've seen from the NDP before, and it's going to be so fascinating to see how that plays out. During the election, before all this tariff talk, they had talked about looking at health authorities, acknowledging that the opposition might have a point, that those had become a little bit bloated and that there might be opportunity to cut them a little bit. And it's going to be really interesting to see if we see that from more ministries, and if they are able to sort of tighten things up a little bit. It's an interesting conversation, obviously, with everything that's happening in the States with letting federal workers go and how controversial that is. I think it's going to be a new big conversation that I'm sure we will not be able to avoid politicizing. So I think that's going to be the most interesting thing to watch in the next couple of years, if they're actually able to deliver on this, plus the economic growth. I think obviously that would have been a lot easier absent the tariffs. Are they going to be able to deliver on these big projects and all of these other measures that they're trying to move forward with to grow the economy, and that sort of new focus that we're seeing the government have?
Yeah, so far the answer to that is no, Allie. With the discipline required for the spending freeze, the hiring freeze, the efficiencies earmarked in the budget at $300 million this year, $600 million in future years. I did the arithmetic. I put it into the websites, and the websites did the arithmetic for me. Sorry, grade 12 math teacher, but at this rate of a $300 to $600 million savings on a $95 billion budget, it'd take 20 years to clear off our deficit. So I'm not sure. That's assuming that the NDP can hold it and not hire a bunch of new political staff and give them a bunch of promotions and raises, which we have been seeing and the opposition has been highlighting as well. So I don't know what you make of those savings that the minister has been talking about, sharpening her pencil.
They're not big enough. They're not serious enough. And I think that's what I'm gathering from it. It's, a lot of excuse and a lot of even what Jeff said, hold tight, but we can't afford to do that anymore. Like I read in John Rustad's piece in the Vancouver Sun that 45,000 job losses by 2029, that's the size of Vernon. Like that's nuts. When we give like these incremental tiny wins, like the finance minister saying that it's about $100 ICBC rebate. Like, in what world does that make any difference whatsoever? And so beyond the line by line items of this budget, it doesn't inspire confidence. The throne speech didn't either, right? And the criticism is that it didn't have anything from that they announced during the campaign in their platform. Nothing new, nothing there. And they can't continue to blame external circumstances as to why they can't deliver on these things. And so it really should scare people. And I think that was the point of John Rustad's op-ed.
Yeah, well, there is the potential that this contingency fund can allow them to fund some of those election promises. But so far,
there's so much more that's needed. I think it sounds big, $4 billion, but our wildfire budget was $1 billion last year, and they only budgeted a couple $100 million. They've got all the wage negotiations with the public sector that's going to get eaten up by that. Plus anything that we need to respond to the tariffs. It's gonna
well,
go
what
quick.
About private investment into this province as well? I mean, that's gone out the window, and there's nothing in there that would also inspire investment back into this province.
Well, I would agree in the respect that with both of you, in the respect that the government needs to do more than looking internally for cost savings, and that private sector investment in the province is really important. In the throne speech and in the lead up to it, the government talked about accelerating economic development. They've identified 18 projects, private sector projects, worth $20 billion in investment. That's important, but that by itself on the private sector investment side is not enough. They need to think bigger. They need to identify other economic development projects and move those forward as fast as they can, respecting environmental and First Nations obligations. But the one head scratcher I had in the budget is that given this commitment, you look at the budget for the Environmental Assessment Office, which reviews all these projects. You look at all the ministries, for example, the Ministry of Mining and Critical Minerals, flatline budget. So where are you going to find the people and the resources to move these things faster, as the government's ambition is? Mr. Bailey said, well, we're going to need to do better with what we have. I think government's going to have to revisit this and look at more people if it wants to move forward that private sector investment in BC.
I think the frontline permitting review, I remember when Eby announced the hiring freeze, he highlighted that as an exemption. If we need to hire in that area, we can.
Yeah, they need to, if it's an exemption, put some budget to it.
Yeah.
And they haven't done that.
Yeah, but you know what did go up? Premier's office budget. So there you go. That'll help buy some more flags. The Conservatives, we talked about the Conservative AGM. Turns out it was actually a pretty good weekend for John Rustad. His slate was elected, his policies were approved, his constitution was amended. Came out of that on a high, headed into the week, and ended up with MLA Dallas Brodie going online in a video, doubling down on her residential school comments about no bodies being found in graves in Kamloops, getting into a public spat with the House Leader, Allie, suggesting that Ms. Warbus is a New Democrat who sided with the New Democrats, getting ugly in the hallway. Warbus, an emotional kind of address saying, I didn't come to the legislature to deal with this kind of stuff. So, and they were shouting inside the Conservative caucus. So all of that journey that John Rustad went on, Allie, through space and time, leaving the opening for him to say this is a big tent, and David Eby to come out and say it looks to me like it's more like a circus tent. Not a great week for the Conservatives, even though it started out pretty well. What did you make of it?
It did start off pretty well. John did have a successful AGM with a ton of members in Nanaimo, and all leaving kind of unified on what we need to do as a party, and that's membership money grow from where the party was. Lead into the week with the Dallas Brodie incident. What I'll say about this is that sometimes it's okay to just say that we have some internal caucus dynamics and not air it out for the public to see. That would have been just fine. Unfortunately, she did not do that, and that's why we're in this position. The big tent that the party refers to, many political parties do, that's a combination of not ideological differences, a lot of personality differences, and experience. And in this video that had a monologue of about 20 minutes of Dallas Brodie's thoughts, was that she admitted that she is brand new to politics and that this is all very, very new to her. And in that, it's realizing that the caucus work on being a little bit more unified does take a lot of leadership, and that could come from the leader or the whip. And so I think that's where the party really needs to focus on.
Yeah, it does. Well, the problem with that, though, is that, John Rustad has promised to not whip people and force them to toe a line and have that free speech. And so now he's stuck in the same position every other leader was stuck in dealing with him, which is whether to discipline the person who speaks out. We only got a couple minutes left. Jillian, just your quick thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think, the bigger the tent, the harder it is to hold it up. And that's what we're seeing here, because it sounds like, from what Warbuss is saying, I mean, her statements are quite remarkable. She sounds like she's on the brink of leaving, which would be a huge loss for them. There is just a limit. People have personal values and lines in the sand that they're just not willing to cross. That sounds like that's a line for her. It sounds like it's a line for Peter Millibar. Also, one of their greatest assets in caucus. And I think, for Rustad's leadership, the Costco chickens have come home to roost, right? Like he needs to decide what he has to make a choice. You can't not making a choice is not leadership. So
that's great. Something. That's the best line,
End
Jeff.
the show there.
You got 30 seconds, Jeff. Let's load a fish in a bite.
Yeah, let's not mince words. Dallas Brodie is a disgrace. She didn't just deny the harm of residential schools, soft pedaled the harm, including 4,000 kids who never came home. She mocked survivors, including her own caucus colleague, Stolo Nation MLA Allie Warbuss, for daring to tell the truth. It isn't just ignorance, it's sneering malice. So shame on Dallas Brodie. Shame on the voters of Vancouver Kilchena for sending her to the legislature knowing exactly who she was. And shame on John Rustad for letting her spew this garbage, even at her own caucus colleagues, while he washes his hands with a feckless shrug.
Not very
MLAs
funny,
from all parties,
effective.
history's going to remember who stood up and who stood by. Be on the right side of this one.
All right, we'll see. There's a fast developing story. We'll see what happens. With that, we'll discuss it next week, along with all the latest. Thank you to the panel for being here. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe, and we'll be back next week with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/UFCW Canada.